morning, everybody. I hope everyone is doing well. It looks like we're live on Rumble. That little beginning recording helps me, just gives me a little time to make sure that everything's going well on Rumble. I hope everyone is well. I hope you've had a good week so far. I know we're early in the week. Fix our camera here. There we go. Okay, so first let's do the update on Abby. Abby is doing much, much better. For anybody who didn't see the videos, Abby, last Wednesday, she started throwing up, and she's not my cat to puke. And it was just odd because like as soon as she would eat, she would throw up with just in a minute or so. And so I thought, well, she's a cat. They do that. Even though she doesn't do that, I'll just keep an eye on her. Well, Thursday she felt warm. And I thought, okay, she was still vomiting. And then Friday morning, and then she was starting to get kind of listless. Then Friday morning, she was sitting in the bedroom door and she went all the way to, we got to fix something here. Hopefully we're not on Wi-Fi. She vomited and it went all the way to the bathroom door, which is about 5 or 6 feet. And I thought, okay, definitely not normal for cats to projectile vomit. So I got her to the vet. She was running a high fever. She was dehydrated. Her platelet count was really low, which was weird. And they did an x-ray, did labs, and were trying to rule out a bowel obstruction. And so the x-ray didn't show anything, but he cautioned me that bowel obstructions are not easy to see on x-ray in cats. So he gave her a shot of something for nausea, gave her a injection for fever, and then an antibiotic, and then gave her fluids. And so I took her home. That was Friday. He said, if she's not any better by Saturday or she's worse, bring her back first thing. Well, they're only open till 11 on Saturday, and I offered her food. She didn't want it, but she seemed a little better. And I thought, well, I hate to rush her over there when nothing's really changed. And so Sunday she was looking very, very bad. And I did a sub-Q infusion of fluids for her. And thank God for my nursing career, and I know how to do that kind of stuff. And then Monday she started to perk up a little bit. She ate, and not much, just a teaspoon of food and wet food and really a bunch of water. And then yesterday she actually was waiting for her food in the morning. She didn't eat much, but I've been putting extra fluid on it, extra water on it, so that she can, have some extra fluids. And so she did, lick all that up. And then yesterday she played a little bit, and that was exciting. And so then this morning I got up to her running around the house, and it was just, she's only 4 years old, and it's the weirdest thing. When I lived, before Don and I got married, I had cats, and I rarely had a cat that didn't make it 10 years. Well, Don, for some reason, has some kind of voodoo in his house where cats only live about 7 years, but 4 years is a lot shy of that. And I told the vet that. He didn't think there was much to it, but it's been true for all his cats. So maybe it's the 7-year itch and he's just a cat murderer. I doubt that. But, men shock their wives all the time. Just kidding. So anyway, she's just looking so much better. I'm trying to see my chat here. There we go. Hi, Holden. Hi, Debbie. Holden, I saw you on Dan Bongino's show yesterday in the chat, and I tried to message you and say hi, but that chat moves so fast, I figured you didn't see me. So anyway, that's where we are with Abby. She's looking much better. It's such a relief. I actually felt comfortable this morning, going away down here for a couple hours and, not having to keep an eye on her, because Steve Martin is a jerk, and he's like, what's wrong with her? Why won't she play? And so he was trying everything he could to antagonize her. Hi, Crystal. So the second thing is, in the show notes today, you'll notice there's a Give, Send, Go campaign. My youngest son, who is a really good kid, I mean, all my kids are good kids, but he's a really good kid, always held long-term jobs since he was in high school. He's been at this job 7 years. He and his fiancée, Jess, are supposed to get married next summer. And so they've been engaged. They kind of had to delay things because of COVID. And, so that threw everything off. And with this change in the economy, their rent has gone up like $500 a month, something ridiculous that they can't afford. And so they're scrambling to try to find something because their lease is up in August. So they postponed the wedding. And we're doing the wedding on the cheap, like at her dad's house. They just, Jess said, I can't have this stress of not knowing where we're going to live and plan a wedding, which, they're very practical. And so, that was the big thing. They were searching. We were praying for them to find something in a safe neighborhood, good and affordable, because they're in Lexington. And so I guess maybe it's been 2 weeks ago now. Jake called late in the evening. He'd been working late. He works for a logistics company. He's been there for 7 years. And he was freaking out. He's like, something's seriously wrong with my car. There's no place for me to pull over. So I gave the phone to Don, and Don was trying to troubleshoot what it might be. And Jake said, it sounds like there's a wrench being thrown around in the engine or something, but there was no safe place for him to pull over. Well, he had bought this car probably a little more than a year ago from my dad, and my dad sold it to him for $2,000 under Blue Book, or he never would have owned this car. It was my dad's old Mercedes. Not old, like a 2013, but he sold it to him for such a steal. Any other car that we looked at just didn't make any sense because this one was going to be so cheap. And I thought at the time, if he has to do a repair on this car, it's going to be a nightmare. So that's going on. Don's like, just limp it home. You can't, there's no place for you to pull off. And we were really worried. And Jess was following him. And that's his fiance, future daughter-in-law. And everything, we're hoping he's made it home okay. And then he calls and he's like, I think the engine just blew up. The RPMs just went to zero. I don't even know if we can get it off the road. And they couldn't. And so these cars were zipping around them. They had their hazards on. They were scared to death they were going to get hit, but they were in construction. There just was nowhere to go. So they're right there in the road. It's dark. And, people driving as people do. And I was terrified that they were going to get hit. I just sick to my stomach because it took 40 minutes for a tow truck to get there. And so we told him, tow it here, tow it to Winchester. We know a good mechanic here. And I think they were going to, I can't remember how much they were going to charge him. So there was the standard tow fee plus so much a mile. And he's like, Mom, I can't afford that. I'm just going to have it towed here. And he had already made those arrangements, so we couldn't undo it. And so he had it towed up there to the dealership, and they came back with, so what had happened was the axle had snapped, which apparently is a problem in these cars. So when the axle snapped, thank God he wasn't hurt. The axle snapped, it damaged the CAT sensor, the O2 sensor, I can't remember what else. And the repairs were going to be $6,600. And I'm like, Jake, I don't just have that sitting around. And, most of our family doesn't. We're kind of just, we're not starving, but we don't have extra. And so he was just tearful about it. And I'm like, okay, this is crazy. This poor kid, everything is hitting all at once. And you know how that happens. And Don said, call this guy in Winchester and see, what he says. I wish I could remember the name of it, Floyd's or something. But it's a guy that is definitely maybe Indian or something like that. Doesn't sound like a Floyd. And so he looked at all the costs and everything, and he was able to get it down to $3,600, which is huge, $3,000 less. I knew he was getting gouged at the dealership. And then we've got the money, the charge for the tow to bring it down here. So I set up a Give, Send, Go to help raise $4,000 for that, so that they can put the little bit of funds they have set back to trying to find a place to live before their lease runs out. So my friend Tracy Beans shared the Give, Send, Go campaign on her Dark to Light show, and I put it up on Twitter and every place else. And we've managed to raise about, I think, $601. So if you guys could donate to that, if you're able, that would just be a huge blessing to us. There in the show notes, you'll see where you can donate to support the show. Anything that you donate to support the show between now and the repairs will go to help Jacob as well. So you can donate that way, or you can donate via the Give, Send, Go. Either way, it's all going to go to the kids. And hopefully we can get this wedding back on track. They've been together since high school. Jake is, it's terrible that I can never remember this. Jake's 26, and Jess is a year younger than him. So any help you guys can swing our way, if you could share the campaign, that would be great. I know, a Give, Send, Go for a car repair sounds kind of lame. It's not like a brain tumor or anything like that. But, when you're worried about not having a place to live and you can't, and your car's not working and you need to be able to get to work, it's a huge problem. So you guys have always been great to bless me in the past, and just anything you could do, prayers if you can't do anything. And if you can share the campaign, that would be great. So all of that said, I hope your week was good. The news has been crazy this week. We're definitely going to be on Friday. I was going to run it by you guys. I've not been getting a lot of feedback when I ask, but would a day on the weekend during the day be better for the Friday night podcast? And the reason I asked that is because I noticed there's not, most of the big podcasters that are on Rumble don't do a podcast on the weekends. So there's really not a lot to watch if you've caught up on everything through the week. Sundays are especially, there's just nothing going on. And so I would consider moving it if that would be easier for you guys. It might increase our viewership some. We're at 2,000, which is great. We've been here, September will be 2 years, but we started from nothing. And so just let me know your thoughts on that. If that would be easier, if, a Saturday or a Sunday would be a time that it would be more likely that you'd be able to tune in because you don't have a million other things going. You're not on a Friday night date. You're not wrangling kids. They're kind of busy with whatever. So let me know about that. Give me some feedback. My email, all my contact information is in the show notes, in the description section. I may have to go over and put it up on YouTube, but I will do that in a little bit. So now to today. Today we're reading The Giver by Lois Lowry. Last week we left off and stopped at the end of chapter 5. So today we'll start with chapter 6. And I think it has just already been, that book was written in 1993. And it is so telling. It's almost prophetic for the things that are going on now and the things that we're being steered to. If you're not paying attention to what's going on with NATO and the World Health Organization, our government is trying to give control of a pandemic response. So if we were to have another pandemic, rather than our government controlling it, it would be controlled under the structure of the World Health Organization. So whatever they said we would have to do, and as Americans, we should not be beholden to the World Health Organization. Granted, our public health officials did a horrible job, but mostly because they were being disingenuous. They were using models to predict things. They were rushing drugs along. They were suppressing other drugs that we knew to be helpful. I can't imagine how much worse it would be if the World Health Organization were handling it. And then you've got NATO, which, they're trying to give more and more authority to. And so I can really see, as I'm reading The Giver this many years later after I first read it, how all this could just fall on us before we knew it. And so I think it's a good cautionary tale for us. Hello, Tennessee woman. I'm a little scratchy this morning. Sorry, I've gotten a lot of sleep since Abby's been doing sick. She's, much better. Hi, Patty. So we'll go ahead and we'll start with chapter 6 of The Giver. Let me share my screen here so you guys can see it. I don't know. I'm sorry about the voice, guys. Oh, there was one other cool thing. So if you guys haven't seen, I posted on Facebook and on Twitter. I'm Witthealth Coach, WITT Health Coach, all one word, on Twitter. But if you haven't seen, I posted the talk that I did the other night, the near-death experience talk that I did for the Asheville Wisdom Exchange. And so you can just go onto their website. There's a link and you can watch it. I forgot to put it in the show notes, but I'll try to remember to go in and put it in after. Did that last week or week before maybe, and it was a great show. They were a great audience, had lots of wonderful questions. And the other development is, so if you haven't gone to YouTube, you can go to YouTube and you can search Anthony Chene, Chene, and Penny Wittbrodt. And you'll find a documentary that he and I did where I shared my story of my near-death experience. I think last year, maybe a little bit longer than that. I can't quite remember. It was hot, I know that. Well, Anthony contacted me probably just before the first of the year and said that he was going to be doing a big documentary, a film, and wanted to know if I would be in it. And Anthony interviews all kinds of people, so the list to be in the film was really a short list. And so I agreed to be in it. I hadn't heard anything back. And this week he messaged me and said, hey, it's a go. We're crowdfunding it. I've already got most of the interviews done. So Pim Van Lommel is in it. Dr. Atwater's in it. Let me see who else. There were 3 really big names. And then there's 3 near-death experiencers, and I'm one of them. It's Pim Van Lommel. I think I'm saying that right. Yeah, Raymond Moody, Pim Van Lommel, and Dr. PMH Atwater, as well as 3 NDE accounts. I don't know if you guys will have seen these. Barbara Bartoloma, Vinnie Tolman, and me. Says the final documentary should be an hour to an hour and 30 minutes. And so far, everybody but me has been filmed, and we're going to get that filming done before the end of the summer. So he'll start editing that, and it'll probably be out in the fall. So that's super exciting and a fun development. And the other one is that if you guys don't follow Andrew Klavan, Klavan, there are no E's in Klavan, he interviewed the other day. He's on the Daily Wire, but he's also on Rumble. If you guys don't follow him, he did an interview with Pastor John Burke the other day about Pastor Burke's upcoming book, Imagine Heaven. So Pastor Burke did a book called Imagine God, and it hit the New York Times bestseller list. He's had several bestsellers. And then this is the second in that series, and I'm featured in that book along with other people. Well, Andrew Klavan interviewed him the other day, and it was funny because I just happened to catch it. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's John. And, so I turned on the podcast, and he was talking about the upcoming book, which was really cool. So I tweeted to Andrew Klavan, hey, I'm featured in that book. And I put in a link to one of my near-death experience videos, and he retweeted it. And so that was cool. But that's coming up. That book releases, I want to say December 13th. And I am working to get my book finished by then so that we can kind of, what is that called? Kind of piggyback off that book. So, people will read that story and then they'll Google my name and see if they can find me. And we want to have a book for them to look at. So keep me in prayer for all of that. Book writing is not easy. And I've got other projects going in the meantime. So it's a real push to get it done. Debbie says one day is as good as the next for us, but we're retired. And Richard Muller, Dan Bongino are talking to the point that China could be putting out another virus to the West as warfare. Yeah, I saw that. Isn't that scary? We're going to go over all that on Friday. We're going to go over the malaria cases in Florida and Texas and kind of dispel some of the misinformation that's coming out about that and how it's being spun. Good morning, Denise. You are over, I don't know if you're on YouTube or Facebook. On the road. Love to all of you. Oh, okay. Hi, hon. Please put a note of the documentary info in which you'll be featured in the comments. It's not done yet. The documentary is not done. There's the one that I did with Anthony Chene, and you can, hi, Lisa, and you can just search that. So just do Anthony Chene, Chene on Facebook, or not Facebook, YouTube with my name as well, and it'll pop right up. It's just Anthony Chene and Penny Wittbrodt. And so there's all that. And if I think of it, I'll try. Is that your reminder to put it in the comments? Or not in the comments, but in the description. But that's all of that. I feel like I've got you up to date there. So we'll start reading here. And we're starting in chapter 6. I don't know if you guys can see that. It looks really cruddy on my screen. I'll look here once Rumble gets caught up. There's a bit of a delay. Chapter 6. Lily, please hold still, Mother said again. Lily, standing in front of her, fidgeted impatiently. I can tie them myself, she complained. I always have. I know that, Mother replied. straightening the hair ribbons on the little girl's braids. But I also know that they constantly come loose, and more often than not, they're dangling down your back by afternoon. Today, at least, we want them to be neatly tied and to stay neatly tied. I don't like hair ribbons. I'm glad I only have to wear them one more year, Lily said irritably. Next year, I get my bicycle too, she added more cheerfully. There are good things each year, Jonas reminded her. This year, you get to start your volunteer hours. And remember last year when you became a 7? You were so happy to get your front button jacket. The little girl nodded and looked down at herself, at the jacket with its row of large buttons that designated her as a 7. 4s, 5s, and 6s all wore jackets that fastened down the back, so that they would have to have help, so they would have to help each other dress and would learn interdependence. The front button jackets was the first sign of independence, the first very visible symbol of growing up. The bicycle, at 9, would be the powerful emblem of moving gradually out into the community, away from the protective family unit. Lily grinned and wriggled away from her mother. And this year, you get your assignment. Oh, hold on a second. We lost comments here. She said to Jonas in an excited voice, I hope you get pilot and that you take me flying. Sure, I will, said Jonas, and I'll get a special little parachute that just fits you, and I'll take you up to, maybe 20,000 feet, and open the door and, Jonas, Mother warned. I was only joking, Jonas groaned. I don't want to pilot anyway. If I get pilot, I'll put in an appeal. Come on, Mother said. She gave Lily's ribbons a final tug. Jonas, are you ready? Did you take your pill? I want to get a good seat in the auditorium. She prodded Lily to the front door, and Jonas followed. It was a short ride to the auditorium, Lily waving to her friends from her seat on the back of Mother's bicycle. Jonas stowed his bicycle beside Mother's and made his way through the throng to find his group. The entire community attended the ceremony each year. For the parents, it meant 2 holidays. From work, they sat together in the huge hall. Children sat with their groups until they went one by one to the stage. Father, though, would not join Mother in the audience right away. For the earliest ceremony, the naming, the nurturers brought the new children to the stage. Jonas, from his place in the balcony with the 11s, searched the auditorium for a glimpse of Father. It wasn't at all hard to spot the nurturers section at the front. Coming from it were the wails and howls of the new children who sat squirming on the nurturers' laps. At every other public ceremony, the audience was silent and attentive. But once a year, they all smiled indulgently at the commotion from the little ones, waiting to receive their names and families. Jonas finally caught his father's eye and waved. Father grinned back and waved, then held up the hand of the new child on his lap, making it wave too. It wasn't Gabriel. Gabe was back at the nurturing center today, being cared for by the night crew. He had been given an unusual and special reprieve from the committee and granted an additional year of nurturing before his naming and placement. Father had gone before the committee with a plea on behalf of Gabriel, who had not yet gained the weight appropriate to his days of life, nor begun to sleep soundly enough at night to be placed with his family unit. Normally, such a new child would be labeled inadequate and released from the community. Instead, as a result of Father's plea, Gabriel had been labeled uncertain and given the additional year. He would continue to be nurtured at the center and would spend his nights with Jonas's family unit. Each family member, including Lily, had been required to sign a pledge that they would not become attached to this little temporary guest, and that they would relinquish him without protest or appeal when he was assigned to his own family unit at next year's ceremony. At least, Jonas thought, after Gabriel was placed next year, they would still see him often because he would be part of the community. If he were ever released, they would not see him again, ever. Those who were released, even as new children, were sent elsewhere and never returned to the community. Father had not had to release a single new child this year, so Gabriel would have represented a real failure and sadness. Even Jonas, though he didn't hover over the little one the way Lily and his father did, was glad that Gabe had not been released. The first ceremony began right on time, and Jonas watched as one after another each new child was given a name and handed by the nurturers to its new family unit. For some, it was a first child, but many came to the stage accompanied by another child, beaming with pride to receive a little brother or sister, the way Jonas had when he was about to be 5. Asher poked Jonas's arms. "Remember when we got Philippa?" he asked in a long, loud whisper. Jonas nodded. It had only been last year. Asher's parents had waited quite a long time before applying for a second child. Maybe, Jonas suspected, they had been so exhausted by Asher's lively foolishness that they had needed a little time. 2 of their group, Fiona and another female named Thea, were missing temporarily, waiting with their parents to receive new children. But it was rare that there was such an age gap between children in a family unit. When her family's ceremony was completed, Fiona took the seat that had been saved for her in the row ahead of Asher and Jonas. She turned and whispered to them, "He's cute, but I didn't like his name very much." She made a face and giggled. Fiona's new brother had been named Bruno. It wasn't a great name, Jonas thought, like Gabriel, for example, but it was okay. The audience applause, which was enthusiastic at each naming, rose in an exuberant swell when one parental pair, glowing with pride, took a male new child and heard him named Caleb. This new Caleb was a replacement child. The couple had lost their first Caleb, a cheerful little 4. Loss of a child was very, very rare. The community was extraordinarily safe, each citizen watchful and protective of all children. But somehow the first little Caleb had wandered away unnoticed and had fallen into the river. The entire community had performed the ceremony of loss together, murmuring the name of Caleb throughout an entire day less and less frequently, softer in volume as the long and somber day went on, so that the little 4 seemed to fade away gradually from everyone's consciousness. Now, at this special naming, the community performed the brief murmur of replacement ceremony, repeating the name for the first time since the loss, softly and slowly at first, then faster and with greater volume as the couple stood on the stage with the new child sleeping in the mother's arms. It was as if the first Caleb were returning. Another new child was given the name Roberto, and Jonas remembered that Roberto the Old had been released only last week. But there was no murmur of replacement ceremony for the new little Roberto. Release was not the same as loss. He sat politely through the ceremonies of 2 and 3 and 4, increasingly bored as he was each year. Then a break for midday meal served outdoors, and back again to the seats for the 5s, 6s, 7s, and finally, last of the first day's ceremonies, the 8s. Jonas watched and cheered as Lily marched proudly to the stage, became an 8, and received the identifying jacket that she would wear this year. This one with smaller buttons and, for the first time, pockets, indicating that she was mature enough now to keep track of her own small belongings. She stood solemnly, listening to the speech of firm instructions on the responsibilities of 8 and doing volunteer hours for the first time. But Jonas could see that Lily, though she seemed attentive, was looking longingly at the row of gleaming bicycles, which would be presented tomorrow morning to the 9s. Next year, Lily Billy, Jonas thought. It was an exhausting day, and even Gabriel, retrieved in his basket from the nurturing center, slept soundly that night. Finally, it was the morning of the ceremony of 12. Now Father sat beside Mother in the audience. Jonas could see them applauding dutifully as the 9s, one by one, wheeled their new bicycles, each with its gleaming name tag attached to the back from the stage. He knew that his parents cringed a little, as he did, when Fritz, who lived in the dwelling next door to theirs, received his bike and almost immediately bumped into the podium with it. Fritz was a very awkward child who had been summoned for chastisement again and again. His transgressions were small ones always: shoes on the wrong feet, schoolwork misplaced, failure to study adequately for a quiz, but each such error reflected negatively on his parents' guidance and infringed on the community's sense of order and success. Jonas and his family had not been looking forward to Fritz's bicycle, which they realized would probably too often be dropped on the front walk instead of wheeled neatly into its port. Finally, the nines were all resettled in their seats, each having wheeled a bicycle outside where it would be waiting for its owner at the end of the day. Everyone always chuckled and made small jokes when the nines rode home for the first time. "Want me to show you how to ride?" older friends would call. "I know you've never been on a bike before." But invariably, the grinning nines, who in technical violation of the rule had been practicing secretly for weeks, would mount and ride off in perfect balance. Training wheels never touched the ground. Then the tens. Jonas never found the ceremony of 10 particularly interesting, only time-consuming, as each child's hair was snipped neatly into its distinguished cut. Females lost their braids at 10, and males too relinquished their long, childish hair and took on the more manly short style, which exposed their ears. Laborers moved quickly to the stage with brooms and swept away the mounds of discarded hair. Jonas could see the parents of the new tens stir and murmur, and he knew that this evening, in many dwellings, they would be snipping and straightening the hastily done haircuts, trimming them into a neater line. 11s. It seemed a short time ago that Jonas had undergone the ceremony of 11, but he remembered that it was not one of the more interesting ones. By 11, one was only waiting to be 12. It was simply a marking of time with no meaningful changes. There was a new clothing, different undergarments for the females whose bodies were beginning to change, and longer trousers for the males with a specifically shaped pocket for the small calculator that they would use this year in school. But those were simply presented in wrapped packages without an accompanying speech. Break for midday meal. Jonas realized he was hungry. He and his group mates congregated by the tables in front of the auditorium and took their packaged food. Yesterday there had been merriment at lunch, a lot of teasing and energy, but today the group stood anxiously, separate from the other children. Jonas watched the nines gravitate toward their waiting bicycles, each one admiring his or her name tag. He saw the 10 stroking their new shortened hair, the females shaking their heads to feel the unaccustomed lightness without the heavy braids they had worn so long. "I heard about a guy who was absolutely certain he was going to be assigned engineer," Asher muttered as they ate, "and instead they gave him sanitation laborer. He went out the next day, jumped into the river, swam across, and joined the next community he came to. Nobody ever saw him again." Jonas laughed. "Somebody made that story up, Ash," he said. "My father said he heard that story when he was 12. But Asher wasn't reassured. He was eyeing the river where it was visible behind the auditorium. "I can't even swim very well," he said. "My swimming instructor said that I don't have the right boyishness or something." "Buoyancy," Jonas corrected him. "Whatever. I don't have it. I sink." "Anyway," Jonas pointed out, "have you ever once known of anyone, I mean really known for sure, Asher, not just heard a story about it, who joined another community?" "No," Asher admitted reluctantly. "But you can. It says so in the rules. If you don't fit in, you can apply for elsewhere and be released. My mother says that once, about 10 years ago, someone applied and was gone the next day." Then he chuckled. "She told me that because I was driving her crazy. She threatened to apply for elsewhere. She was joking." "I know, but it was true what she said, that someone did that once. She said that it was really true, here today and gone tomorrow, never seen again. Not even a ceremony of release." Jonas shrugged. It didn't worry him. How could someone not fit in? The community was so meticulously ordered, the choices so carefully made. Even the matching of spouses was given such weighty consideration that sometimes an adult who applied to receive a spouse waited months or even years before a match was approved and announced. All of the factors, disposition, energy level, intelligence, and interests, had to correspond and to interact perfectly. Jonas's mother, for example, had higher intelligence than his father, but his father had a calmer disposition. They balanced each other. Their match, which like all matches had been monitored by the committee of elders for 3 years before they could apply for children, had always been a successful one. Like the matching of spouses and the naming and placement of new children, the assignments were scrupulously thought through by the committee of elders. He was certain that his assignment, whatever it was to be, and Asher's too, would be the right one for them. He only wished that the midday break would conclude, that the audience would re-enter the auditorium, and the suspense would end. As if in answer to his unspoken wish, the signal came, and the crowd began to move toward the doors. Chapter 7. Now Jonas's group had taken a new place in the auditorium, trading with the new 11s so that they sat in the very front, immediately before the stage. They were arranged by their original numbers, the numbers they had been given at birth. The numbers were rarely used after the naming, but each child knew his number, of course. Sometimes parents used them in irritation at a child's misbehavior, indicating that mischief made one unworthy of a name. Jonas always chuckled when he heard a parent, exasperated, call sharply to a whining toddler, "That's enough, 23." Jonas was 19. He had been the 19th new child born his year. It had meant that at his naming, he had been already standing and bright-eyed, soon to walk and talk. It had given him a slight advantage the first year or two, a little more maturity than many of his group mates who had been born in the later months of that year. But it evened out, as it always did, by 3. After 3, the children progressed at much the same level, though by their first number 1 could always tell who was a few months older than others in his group. Technically, Jonas's full number was 1119, since there were other 19s, of course, in each group. And today, now that the new 11s had been advanced this morning, there were 2 1119s. At the midday break, he had exchanged smiles with the new one, a shy female named Harriet. But the duplication was only for these few hours. Very soon he would not be an 11, but a 12, and age would no longer matter. He would be an adult, like his parents, though a new one and untrained still. Asher was 4 and sat now in the row ahead of Jonas. He would receive his assignment 4th. Fiona, 18th, was on his left. On his other side sat 20, a male named Pierre, whom Jonas didn't like very much. Pierre was very serious, not much fun, and a worrier, and tattletale too. "Have you checked the rules, Jonas?" Pierre was always whispering solemnly. "I'm not sure that's within the rules." Usually it was some foolish thing that no one cared about, opening his tunic if it was a day with a breeze, taking a brief try on a friend's bicycle, just to experience the different feel of it. The initial speech at the ceremony of 12 was made by the chief elder, the leader of the community, who is elected every 10 years. The speech was much the same each year, recollection of the time of childhood and the period of preparation, the coming responsibilities of adult life, the profound importance of assignment, the seriousness of training to come. Then the chief elder moved ahead in her speech. "This is the time," she began, looking directly at them, "when we acknowledge differences. You 11s have spent all your years till now learning to fit in, to standardize your behavior, to curb any impulse that might set you apart from the group. But today, we honor your differences. They have determined your futures." She began to describe this year's group and its variety of personalities, though she singled no one out by name. She mentioned that there was one who had singular skills at caretaking, another who loved new children, one with unusual scientific aptitude, and a fourth for whom physical labor was an obvious pleasure. Jonas shifted in his seat, trying to recognize each reference as one of his group mates. The caretaking skills were no doubt those of Fiona on his left. He remembered noticing the tenderness with which she had bathed the old. Probably the one with scientific aptitude was Benjamin, the male who had devised new, important equipment for the rehabilitation center. He heard nothing that he recognized as himself, Jonas. Finally, the chief elder paid tribute to the hard work of her committee, which had performed the observations so meticulously all year. The committee of elders stood and was acknowledged by applause. Jonas noticed Asher's yawn slightly, covering his mouth politely with his hand. Then at last the chief elders called number 1 to the stage, and the assignments began. Each announcement was lengthy, accompanied by a speech directed at the new 12. Jonas tried to pay attention as one, smiling happily. Receiving her assignment as fish hatchery attendant, along with words of praise for her childhood, spent doing many volunteer hours there, and her obvious interest in the important process of providing nourishment for the community. Number 1, her name was Madeline, returned, finally amidst applause, to her seat, wearing the new badge that designated her fish hatchery assignment. Jonas was certainly glad that assignment was taken. He wouldn't have wanted it. But he gave Madeline a smile of congratulation. When a female named Inger, received her assignment as birth mother, Jonas remembered that his mother had called it a job without honor. But he thought that the committee had chosen well. Inger was a nice girl, though somewhat lazy, and her body was strong. She would enjoy the 3 years of being pampered that would follow her brief training. She would give birth easily and well, and the task of laborer that would follow would use her strength, keep her healthy, and impose self-discipline. Inger was smiling when she resumed her seat. Birth mother was an important job, if lacking in prestige. Jonas noticed that Asher looked nervous. He kept turning his head and glancing back at Jonas until the group leader had to give him silent chastisement, a motion to sit still and face forward. 3. Isaac was given an assignment as instructor of 6s, which obviously pleased him and was well deserved. Now there were 3 assignments gone, none of them ones that Jonas would have liked. Not that he could have been a birth mother. Anyway, he realized with amusement. He tried to sort through the list in his mind, the possible assignments that remained. But there were so many he gave it up, and anyway, now it was Asher's turn. He paid strict attention as his friend went to the stage and stood self-consciously beside the chief elder. All of us in the community know and enjoy Asher, the chief elder began. Asher grinned and scratched one leg with the other foot. The audience chuckled softly. When the committee began to consider Asher's assignment, she went on, there were some possibilities that were immediately discarded, some that would clearly not have been right for Asher. For example, she said, smiling, we did not consider for an instant designating Asher an instructor of 3s. The audience howled with laughter. Asher laughed too, looking sheepish but pleased at the special attention. The instructor of 3s were in charge of the acquisition of correct language. In fact, the chief elder continued, chuckling a little to herself, we even gave little thought to some retroactive chastisement for the one who had been Asher's instructor of 3s so long ago. At the meeting where Asher was discussed, we retold many of the stories that we all remembered from his days of language acquisition. Especially, she said, chuckling, the difference between snack and smack. Remember, Asher? Asher nodded ruefully, and the audience laughed aloud. Jonas did too. He remembered, though he had been only a 3 at the time himself. The punishment used for small children was a regulated system of smacks with the discipline wand, a thin, flexible weapon that stung painfully when it was wielded. The child care specialists were trained very carefully in the discipline methods: a quick smack across the hands for a bit of minor misbehavior, 3 sharper smacks on the bare legs for a second offense. Poor Asher, who always talked too fast and mixed up words, even as a toddler, as a 3, eager for his juice and crackers at snack time, he one day said smack instead of snack as he stood waiting in the line for the morning treat. Jonas remembered it clearly. He could still see little Asher wiggling with impatience in the line. He remembered the cheerful voice call out, "I want my smack!" The other 3s, including Jonas, had laughed nervously. "Snack," they corrected. You meant snack, Asher." But the mistake had been made, and precision of language was one of the most important tasks of small children. Asher had asked for a smack. The discipline wand in the hand of the child care worker whistled as it came down across Asher's hands. Asher whimpered, cringed, and corrected himself instantly. "Snack," he whispered. But the next morning he had done it again, and again the following week. He couldn't seem to stop, though for each lapse the discipline wand came again, escalating to a series of painful lashes that left marks on Asher's legs. Eventually, for a period of time, Asher stopped talking altogether when he was a 3. For a while, the chief elder said, relating the story, we had a silent Asher, but he learned. She turned to him with a smile. When he began to talk again, it was with great precision, and now his lapses are very few. His corrections and apologies are very prompt, and his good humor is unfailing. The audience murmured in agreement. Asher's cheerful disposition was well known throughout the community. Asher, she lifted her voice to make the official announcement, we have given you the assignment of Assistant Director of Recreation. She clipped on his new badge as he stood beside her, beaming. Then he turned and left the stage as the audience cheered. When he had taken his seat again, the chief elder looked down at him and said the words that she had said now 4 times, and would say to each new 12. Somehow she gave it special meaning for each of them. Asher, she said, thank you for your childhood. The assignments continued, and Jonas watched and listened, relieved now by the wonderful assignment his best friend had been given. But he was more and more apprehensive as his own approached. Now the new 12s in the row ahead had all received their badges. They were fingering them as they sat, and Jonas knew that each one was thinking about the training that lay ahead. For some, one studious male had been selected as doctor, a female as engineer, and another for law and justice. It would be years of hard work and study. Others, like laborers and birth mothers, would have a much shorter period of training. 18, Fiona on his left, was called. Jonas knew she must be nervous, but Fiona was a calm female. She had been sitting quietly, serenely throughout the ceremony. Even the applause, though enthusiastic, seemed serene when Fiona was given the important assignment of caretaker of the old. It was perfect for such a sensitive, gentle girl, and her smile was satisfied and pleased when she took her seat beside him again. Jonas prepared himself to walk to the stage when the applause ended and the chief elder picked up the next folder and looked down to the group to call forward the next new 12. He was calm now that his turn had come. He took a deep breath and smoothed his hair with his hand. 20, he heard her voice say clearly. Pierre. She skipped me, Jonas thought, stunned. Had he heard wrong? No, there was a sudden hush in the crowd, and he knew that the entire community realized that the chief elder had moved from 18 to 20, leaving a gap. On his right, Pierre, with a startled look, rose from his seat and moved to the stage. A mistake. She'd made a mistake, but Jonas knew, even as he had the thought, that she hadn't. The chief elder made no mistakes, not at the ceremony of 12. He felt dizzy and couldn't focus his attention. He didn't hear what assignment Pierre received and was only dimly aware of the applause as the boy returned, wearing his new badge. Then 21, 22, the numbers continued in order. Jonas sat dazed as they moved into the 30s and then the 40s, nearing the end. Each time at each announcement, his heart jumped for a moment, and he thought wild thoughts. Perhaps now she would call his name. Could he have forgotten his own number? No, he'd always been 19. He was sitting in the seat, marked 19. But she had skipped him. He saw the others in his group glance at him, embarrassed, and then avert their eyes quickly. He saw a worried look on the face of his group leader. He hunched his shoulders and tried to make himself smaller in his seat. He wanted to disappear, to fade away, not to exist. He didn't dare to turn and find his parents in the crowd. He couldn't bear to see their faces darkened with shame. Jonas bowed his head and searched through his mind. What had he done wrong? Okay, we're on chapter 8, guys. My blood sugar is just plummeting. I'm going to run up and get some juice. I'm going to put our hold video on, and I will be right back. I'm not sure what's triggered that, but it is what it is, and we must take care of it. So I'll be right back. Oh, it's a close call. Any of you who followed me during COVID on Facebook, it's a crazy little story I'll share before we go into this next chapter. Um, I was super sick, and I was doing a live stream on Facebook. And when I was on oxygen, the whole thing, if you guys don't know the story, if you go through my Rumble channel, all the way to the very first video I ever posted, maybe it's the second one, I can't remember. No, it's the first one. I tell the story of everything I went through with COVID. But anyway, I was doing a live stream one day, and because I wasn't eating very well, my blood sugar dropped. And I have this, my brother has it too, this weird thing where our blood sugar will be completely normal, and then over several minutes, it will just crash. And I've had seizures because of it, because it's dropped into the 30s. If you don't know, 70 to 120 is considered normal. And so that day, I'm doing this live stream, and I don't really remember exactly what happened, but I know I just kept saying, I'm so tired. I just need to go to sleep. I'm so tired. Well, everybody that was in the chat was, typing in, call Don, call Don, call Don, because they knew something was wrong with me, but they didn't know what. And I couldn't see the comments. Everything was blurry, and I just became progressively more slurred and confused. And I cannot imagine. I think Debbie was watching. I cannot imagine. Why is that banner going? Hold on, let's turn that off. Anyway, it freaked everybody out. I don't know if they thought I was having a stroke or what, but my friend Eric Cox happened to be in the chat, and he had Don's phone number. And so I guess I just closed the computer or set the computer down. I don't remember what happened after that, but Eric called Don, and Don came home, and I was just wandering around in the hallway, just white as a ghost, shaking, sweating, and thank God he knew what was wrong. So he checked my blood sugar. I think it was like 42 or something, 46 maybe. And so got me some food, and I always feel terrible after, but got me some food. We got back on the live stream because we had to let everybody know I was okay. I think they were still sitting there. I don't even think I ended the stream. And so I didn't want that to happen today, but I got upstairs and it was 50. So it definitely crashed all of a sudden. And out of nowhere, I ate breakfast. It's just the weirdest thing. But anyway, so there's that. Thank you guys for being patient. And we'll get back to our book here. Goodness. That's a little exhausting. Cliffhanger. No, I'm not going to stop there. Okay. Chapter 8. The audience was clearly ill at ease. They applauded at the final assignment, but the applause was piecemeal, no longer a crescendo of united enthusiasm. There were murmurs of confusion. Jonas moved his hands together, clapping, but it was an automatic, meaningless gesture that he wasn't even aware of. His mind had shut out all of the earlier emotions, the anticipation, excitement, pride, and even the happy kinship with his friends. Now he felt only humiliation and terror. The chief elder waited until the uneasy applause subsided. Then she spoke again. I know, she said in a vibrant, gracious voice, that you all are all concerned, that you feel I've made a mistake. She smiled. The community, relieved from its discomfort very slightly by her benign statement, seemed to breathe more easily. It was very silent. Jonas looked up. I've caused you anxiety, she said. I apologize to my community. Her voice flowed over the assembled crowd. We accept your apology, they all uttered together. Jonas, she said, looking down at him, I apologize to you in particular. I caused you anguish. I accept your apology, Jonas replied shakily. Please come to the stage now. Earlier that day, dressing in his own dwelling, he had practiced the kind of jaunty, self-assured walk that he hoped he would make to the stage when his turn came. All of that was forgotten now. He simply willed himself to stand, to move his feet that felt weighted and clumsy, to go forward, up the steps, and across the platform until he stood at her side. Reassuringly, she placed her arms across his tense shoulders. Jonas has not been assigned, she informed the crowd, and his heart sank. Then she went on. Jonas has been selected. He blinked. What did that mean? He felt a collective questioning stir from the audience. They too were puzzled. In a firm, commanding voice, she announced, Jonas has been selected to be our next receiver of memory. Then he heard the gasp, the sudden intake of breath drawn sharply in astonishment by each of the seated citizens. He saw their faces. The eyes widened in awe, and still he did not understand. Such a selection is very, very rare, the chief elder told the audience. Our community has only one receiver. It is he who trains his successor. We have had our current receiver for a very long time, she went on. Jonas followed her eyes and saw that she was looking at one of the elders. The committee of elders was sitting together in a group, and the chief elder's eyes were now on one, who sat in the midst but seemed oddly separate from them. It was a man Jonas had never noticed before, a bearded man with pale eyes. He was watching Jonas intently. We failed in our last selection, the chief elder said solemnly. It was 10 years ago when Jonas was just a toddler. I will not dwell on the experience because it causes us all terrible discomfort. Jonas didn't know what she was referring to, but he could sense the discomfort of the audience. They shifted uneasily in their seats. We've not been hasty this time, she continued. We could not afford another failure. Sometimes, she went on, speaking now in a lighter tone, relaxing the tension of the auditorium, we are not entirely certain about the assignments, even after the most painstaking observations. Sometimes we worry that the one assigned might not develop through training every attribute necessary. 11s are still children after all. What we observe is playfulness and patience. The requirements to become nurturer could, with maturity, be revealed as simply foolishness and indolence. So we continue to observe during training and to modify behavior when necessary. But the receiver in training cannot be observed, cannot be modified. That is stated quite clearly in the rules. He is to be alone, apart, while he is prepared by the current receiver for the job which is the most honored in our community. Alone? Apart? Jonas listened with increasing unease. Therefore, the selection must be sound. It must be unanimous choice of the committee. They can have no doubts, however fleeting. If during the process an elder reports a dream of uncertainty, that dream has the power to set a candidate aside instantly. Jonas was identified as a possible receiver many years ago. We have observed him meticulously. There were no dreams of uncertainty. He has shown all of the qualities that a receiver must have. With her hand still firmly on his shoulder, the chief elder listed the qualities. Intelligence, she said. We are all aware that Jonas has been a top student throughout his school days. Integrity, she said next. Jonas has, like all of us, committed minor transgressions. She smiled at him. We expect that. We hoped also that he would present himself promptly for chastisement, and he has always done so. Courage, she went on. Only one of us here today has ever undergone the rigorous training required of a receiver. He, of course, is the most important member of the committee, the current receiver. It was he who reminded us again and again of the courage required. Jonas, she said, turning to him, but speaking in a voice that the entire community could hear, the training required of you involves pain, physical pain. He felt fear flutter within him. You have never experienced that. Yes, you've scraped your knees and falls from your bicycle. Yes, you crushed your finger in a door last year. Jonas nodded, agreeing, as he recalled the incident and its accompanying misery. But you will be faced now, she explained gently, with pain of a magnitude that none of us here can comprehend. because it is beyond our experience. The receiver himself was not able to describe it, only to remind us that you would be faced with it, that you would need immense courage. We cannot prepare you for that. But we feel certain that you are brave, she said to him. He did not feel brave at all, not now. The fourth essential attribute, the chief elder said, is wisdom. Jonas has not yet acquired that. The acquisition of wisdom will come through his training. We are convinced that Jonas has the ability to acquire wisdom. That is what we looked for. Finally, the receiver must have one more quality, and it is one which I can only name but not describe. I do not understand it. Oh, I'm sorry, she's reading that. Finally, the receiver must have one more quality, and it is one which I can only name but not describe. I do not understand it. You members of the community will not understand it either. Perhaps Jonas will, because the current receiver has told us that Jonas already has this quality. He calls it the capacity to see beyond. The chief elder looked at Jonas with a question in her eyes. The audience watched him too. They were silent. For a moment, he froze, consumed with despair. He didn't have it. The whatever she had said, he didn't know what it was. Now was the moment when he would have to confess, to say, no, I don't, I can't, and throw himself on their mercy, ask their forgiveness, to explain that he had been wrongly chosen, that he was not the right one at all. But when he looked out across the crowd, the sea of faces, the thing happened again. The thing that had happened with the apple. They changed. He blinked and it was gone. His shoulders straightened slightly. Briefly, he felt a tiny sliver of sureness for the first time. She was still watching him. They all were. I think it's true, he told the chief elder in the community. I don't understand it yet. I don't know what it is. But sometimes I see something, and maybe it's beyond. She took her arm from his shoulders. Jonas, she said, speaking not to him alone, but to the entire community of which he was a part, you will be trained to be our next receiver of memory. We thank you for your childhood. Then she turned and left the stage, left him there alone, standing and facing the crowd, which began spontaneously the collective murmur of his name. Jonas. It was whisper at first, hushed, barely audible. Jonas, Jonas. Then louder and faster. Jonas, Jonas, Jonas. With the chant, Jonas knew the community was accepting him and his new role, giving him life the way they had given it to the new child, Caleb. His heart swelled with gratitude and pride, but at the same time he was filled with fear. He did not know what his selection meant. He did not know what he was to become or what would become of him. Chapter 9. Now, for the first time in his 12 years of life, Jonas felt separate, different. He remembered what the chief elder had said, that his training would be alone and apart. But his training had not yet begun, and already, upon leaving the auditorium, he felt the apartness. Holding the folder she had given him, he made his way through the throng, looking for his family unit and for Asher. People moved aside for him. They watched him. He thought he could hear whispers. Ash, he called, spotting his friend near the rows of bicycles. Ride back with me? Sure, Asher smiled, his usual smile, friendly and familiar. But Jonas felt a moment of hesitation from his friend, and uncertainty. Congratulations, Asher said. You too, Jonas replied. It was really funny when she told about the smacks. You got more applause than almost anybody else. The other new 12s clustered nearby, placing their folders carefully into the carrying containers on the backs of their bikes. In each dwelling tonight, they would be studying the instructions for the beginning of their training. Each night, for years, the children had memorized the required lessons for school, often yawning with boredom. Tonight, they would all begin eagerly to memorize the rules for their adult assignments. Congratulations, Asher, someone called. Then that hesitation again. You too, Jonas. Asher and Jonas responded with congratulations to their group mates. Jonas saw his parents watching him from the place where their own bicycles were waiting. Lily had already been strapped into her seat. We waved. They waved back, smiling, but he noticed that Lily was watching him solemnly, her thumb in her mouth. He rode directly to his dwelling, exchanging only small jokes and unimportant remarks with Asher. "See you in the morning, Recreation Director," he called out, dismounting by his door as Asher continued on. "Right, see ya," Asher called back. Once again, there was just a moment when things weren't quite the same, weren't quite as they had always been through the long friendship. Perhaps he'd imagined it. Things couldn't change with Asher. The evening meal was quieter than usual. Lily chattered about her plans for volunteer work she would begin. She said at the nurturing center, since she was already an expert at feeding Gabriel. "I know," she added quickly when her father gave her a warning glance. "I won't mention his name. I know I'm not supposed to know his name." "I can't wait for tomorrow to come," she said happily. Jonas sighed uneasily. "I can," he muttered. "You've been greatly honored," his mother said. "Your father and I are very proud. It's the most important job in the community," Father said. "But just the other night you said that the job of making assignments was the most important." Mother nodded. "This is different. It's not a job, really." "I never thought, never expected," she paused. "There's only one receiver." "But the chief elder said that they had made a selection before and that it failed. What was she talking about?" Both of his parents hesitated. Finally, his father described the previous selection. "It was very much as it was today, Jonas. The same suspense, as 111 had been passed over when the assignments were given. Then the announcement when they singled out the one." Jonas interrupted. "What was his name?" His mother replied, "Her, not his. It was a female, but we are never to speak the name or to use it again for a new child." Jonas was shocked. A name designated not to be spoken indicated the highest degree of disgrace. "What happened to her?" he asked nervously. But his parents looked blank. "We don't know," his father said uncomfortably. "We never saw her again." A silence fell over the room. They looked at each other. Finally, his mother, rising from the table, said, "You've been greatly honored, Jonas, greatly honored." Alone in his sleeping room, prepared for bed, Jonas opened his folder at last. Some of the other 12s he had noticed had been given folders thick with printed pages. He imagined Benjamin, the scientific male in his group, beginning to read pages of rules and instructions with relish. He pictured Fiona smiling her gentle smile as she bent over the lists of duties and methods that she would be required to learn in the days to come. But his own folder was startlingly close to empty. Inside, there was only a single printed sheet. He read it twice. "Jonas, receiver of memory. 1. Go immediately at the end of school hours each day to the annex entrance behind the House of the Old and present yourself to the attendant. 2. Go immediately to your dwelling at the conclusion of training hours each day. 3. From this moment, you are exempted from rules governing rudeness. You may ask any question of any citizen, and you will receive answers. 4. Do not discuss your training with any other member of the community, including parents and elders. 5. From this moment, you are prohibited from dream telling. 6. Except for illness or injury unrelated to your training, do not apply for any medication. 7. You are not permitted to apply for release. 8. You may lie. Jonas was stunned. What would happen to his friendships? His mindless hours of playing ball or riding his bike along the river? Those had been happy and vital times for him. Were they to be completely taken from him now? The simple logistic instructions were to go and when, where expected. When and where to go and when, where expected. Were expected. Good grief. Um, every 12 had to be told, of course, where and how and when to report for training. But he was a little dismayed that his schedule left no time, apparently, for recreation. The exemption from rudeness startled him. Reading it again, however, he realized that it didn't compel him to be rude. It simply allowed him the option. He was quite certain he would never take advantage of it. He was so completely, so thoroughly accustomed to courtesy within the community that the thought of asking another citizen an intimate question, of calling someone's attention to an area of awkwardness, was unnerving. The prohibition of dream telling, he thought, would not be a real problem. He dreamed so rarely that the dream telling did not come easily to him anyway, and he was glad to be excused from it. He wondered briefly, though, how to deal with it at the morning meal. What if he did dream? Should he simply tell his family unit, as he did so often anyway, that he hadn't? That would be a lie. Still, the final rule said, well, he wasn't quite ready to think about the final rule on the page. The restriction of medication unnerved him. Medication was always available to citizens, even to children, through their parents. When he had crushed his finger in the door, he had quickly, gasping into the speaker, notified his mother. She had hastily requisitioned relief of pain medication, which had promptly been delivered to his dwelling. Almost instantly, the excruciating pain in his hand had diminished to the throb, which was now all he could recall of the experience. Rereading rule number 6, he realized that a crushed finger fell into the category of unrelated to training. So if it ever happened again, and he was quite certain it wouldn't, he had been very careful near heavy doors since the accident, he could still receive medication. The pill he took now, each morning, was also unrelated to training, so he would continue to receive the pill. But he remembered uneasily what the chief elder had said about the pain that would come with his training. She had called it indescribable. Jonas swallowed hard, trying without success to imagine what such pain might be like, with no medication at all. But it was beyond his comprehension. He felt no reaction to rule number 7 at all. It had never occurred to him that under any circumstances ever he might apply for release. Finally, he steeled himself to read the final rule again. He had been trained since earliest childhood, since his earliest learning of language, never to lie. It was an integral part of the learning of precise speech. Once, when he had been a 4, he had said, just prior to the midday meal at school, "I'm starving." Immediately, he had been taken aside for a brief private lesson in language precision. He was not starving, it was pointed out. He was hungry. No one in the community was starving, had ever been starving, would ever be starving. To say starving was to speak a lie. An unintentional lie, of course, but the reason for precision of language was to ensure that unintentional lies were never uttered. Did he understand that? They asked him, and he had. He had never within his memory been tempted to lie. Asher did not lie, Lily did not lie, his parents did not lie. No one did. Unless... Now Jonas had thought that he had never had before. Had a thought that he'd never had before. This new thought was frightening. What if others, adults, had, upon becoming 12s, received in their instructions the same terrifying sentence? What if they had all been instructed, "You may lie"? His mind reeled. Now empowered to ask questions of utmost rudeness and promised answers he could conceivably, though it was almost unimaginable, ask someone, some adult, his father perhaps, "Do you lie?" But he would have no way of knowing if the answer he received were true. Chapter 10. "I go in here, Jonas," Fiona told him when they reached the front door of the house of the old after parking their bicycles in the designated area. "I don't know why I'm nervous," she confessed. "I've been here so often before." She turned her folder over in her hands. "Well, everything's different now," Jonas reminded her. "Even the nameplates on our bikes," Fiona laughed. During the night, the nameplate of each new 12 had been removed by the maintenance crew and replaced with the style that indicated citizen in training. I don't want to be late, she said hastily and started up the steps. If we finish at the same time, I'll ride home with you. Jonas nodded, waved to her, and headed around the building toward the annex, a small wing attached to the back. He certainly didn't want to be late for his first day of training either. The annex was very ordinary, its door unremarkable. He reached for the heavy handle, then noticed a buzzer on the wall, so he buzzed instead. Yes? The voice came through a small speaker above the buzzer. It's, Jonas, I'm the new, come in. A click indicated that the door had been unlatched. The lobby was very small and contained only a desk at which a female attendant sat working on some papers. She looked up when he entered. Then, to his surprise, she stood. It was a small thing, the standing, but no one had ever stood automatically to acknowledge Jonas's presence before. Welcome, receiver of memory, she said respectfully. Oh, please, he replied uncomfortably. Call me Jonas. She smiled, pushed a button, and he heard a click that unlocked the door to her left. You may go right in, she told him. Then she seemed to notice his discomfort and to realize its origin. No doors in the community were locked, ever. None that Jonas knew of, anyway. The locks are simply to ensure the receiver's privacy because he needs concentration, she explained. It would be difficult if citizens wandered in looking for the Department of Bicycle Repair or something. Jonas laughed, relaxing a little. The woman seemed very friendly, and it was true, in fact. It was a joke throughout the community that the Department of Bicycle Repair, an unimportant little office, was relocated so often that no one ever knew where it was. There's nothing dangerous here, she told him. But, she added, glancing at the wall clock, he doesn't like to be kept waiting. Jonas hurried through the door and found himself in a comfortably furnished living area. It was not unlike his own family unit's dwelling. Furniture was standard throughout the community, practical, sturdy, the function of each piece clearly defined. A bed for sleeping, a table for eating, a desk for studying. All of those things were in this spacious room, though each was slightly different from those in his own dwelling. The fabrics on the upholstered chairs and sofa were slightly thicker and more luxurious. The table legs were not straight like those at home, but slender and curved, with a small carved decoration at the foot. The bed in an alcove at the far end of the room was draped with a splendid cloth embroidered over its entire surface with intricate designs. But the most conspicuous difference was the books. In his own dwelling, there were the necessary reference volumes that each household contained, a dictionary, and the thick community volume, which contained descriptions of every office, factory, building, and committee, and the book of rules, of course. The books in his own dwelling were the only books that Jonas had ever seen. He had never known that other books existed. But this room's walls were completely covered by bookcases, filled, which reached to the ceiling. There must have been hundreds, perhaps thousands of books, their titles embossed in shiny letters. Jonas stared at them. He couldn't imagine what the thousands of pages contained. Could there be rules beyond the rules that governed the community? Could there be descriptions of offices and factories and committees? He had only a second to look around because he was aware that the man sitting in a chair beside the table was watching him. Hastily, he moved forward, stood before the man, bowed slightly, and said, I'm Jonas. I know. Welcome, receiver of memory. Jonas recognized the man. He was the elder who had seemed separate from the others at the ceremony, though he was dressed in the same special clothing that only elders wore. Jonas looked self-consciously into the pale eyes that mirrored his own. Sir, I apologize for my lack of understanding. He waited, but the man did not give the standard accepting of apology response. After a moment, Jonas went on. But I think, he corrected, reminding himself that if precision of language were ever to be important, it was certainly important now, in the presence of this man. that you are the receiver of memory. I was only assigned, selected yesterday. I'm not anything at all, not yet. The man looked at him thoughtfully, silently. It was a look that combined interest, curiosity, concern, and perhaps a little sympathy as well. Finally, he spoke. Beginning today, this moment, at least to me, you are the receiver. I have been the receiver for a long time, a very, very long time. You can see that, can't you? Jonas nodded. The man was wrinkled, and his eyes, though piercing in their unusual lightness, seemed tired. The flesh around them was darkened into shadowed circles. I can see that you are very old, Jonas responded with respect. The old were always given the highest respect. The man smiled. He touched the sagging flesh on his own face with amusement. I am not, actually, as old as I look, he told Jonas. This job has aged me. I know I look as if I should be scheduled for release very soon, but actually I have a good deal of time left. I was pleased, though, when you were selected. It took a long time. The failure of the previous selection was 10 years ago, and my energy is starting to diminish. I need what strength I have remaining for your training. We have hard and painful work to do, you and I. Please sit down, he said, and gestured toward the nearby chair. Jonas lowered himself onto the soft, cushioned seat. The man closed his eyes and continued speaking. When I became a 12, I was selected as you were. I was frightened, as I'm sure you are. He opened his eyes for a moment and peered at Jonas, who nodded. The eyes closed again. I came to this very room to begin my training. It was such a long time ago. The previous receiver seemed just as old to me as I do to you. He was just as tired as I am today. He sat forward suddenly, opened his eyes, and said, You may ask questions. I have so little experience in describing this process, it is forbidden to talk of it. I know, sir. I've read the instructions, Jonas said. So I may neglect to make things as clear as I should, the man chuckled. My job's important and has enormous honor, but that does not mean I'm perfect. And when I tried before to train a successor, I failed. Please ask any questions that will help you. In his mind, Jonas had questions, 1,000, 1,000,000 questions, as many questions as there were books lining the walls. But he did not ask one, not yet. The man sighed, seeming to put his thoughts in order. Then he spoke again. Simply stated, he said, although it's not really simple at all, my job is to transmit to you all the memories I have within me, memories of the past. Sir, Jonas said tentatively, I would be very interested to hear the story of your life and to listen to your memories. I apologize for interrupting, he added quickly. The man waved his hand impatiently. No apologies in this room. We haven't time. Well, Jonas went on, uncomfortably aware that he might be interrupting again, I'm really interested. I don't mean that I'm not, but I don't exactly understand why it's so important. I could do some adult job in the community, and in my recreation time I could come and listen to the stories from your childhood. I'd like that, actually, he added. I've done that already in the House of the Old. The old like to tell about their childhoods, and it's always fun to listen. The man shook his head. No, no, he said. I'm not being clear. It's not my past, not my childhood that I must transmit to you. He leaned back, resting his head against the back of the upholstered chair. It's the memories of the whole world, he said with a sigh. Before you, before me, before the previous receiver and generations before him. Jonas frowned. The whole world? He asked. I don't understand. Do you mean not just us, not just the community? Do you mean elsewhere too? He tried in his mind to grasp the concept. I'm sorry, sir, I don't understand exactly. Maybe I'm not smart enough. I don't know what you mean when you say the whole world or generations before him. I thought there was only us. I thought there was only now. There's much more. There all that goes beyond, all that is elsewhere, and all that goes back and back and back. I received all of those when I was selected, and here, in this room, all alone, I re-experienced them again and again. It is how wisdom comes and how we shape our future. He rested for a moment, breathing deeply. I am so weighted with them, he said. Jonas felt terrible concern for the man suddenly. It's as if the man paused, seeming to search his mind for the right words of description. It's like going downhill through deep snow on a sled, he said finally. At first it's exhilarating, the speed, the sharp, clear air. But then the snow accumulates, builds up on the runners, and you slow. You have to push hard to keep going, and he shook his head suddenly and peered at Jonas. That means nothing to you, did it? He asked. Jonas was confused. I didn't understand it, sir. Of course you didn't. You don't know what snow is, do you? Jonas shook his head. Or a sled? Runners? No, sir, Jonas said. Downhill? The term means nothing to you? Nothing, sir. Well, it's a place to start. I've been wondering how to begin. Move to the bed and lie face down. Remove your tunic first. Jonas did so, a little apprehensively. Beneath his bare chest, he felt the soft folds of the magnificent cloth that covered the bed. He watched as the man rose and moved first to the wall where the speaker was. It was the same sort of speaker that occupied a place in every dwelling, but one thing about it was different. This one had a switch, which the man deftly snapped to the end that said, off. Jonas almost gasped aloud. To have the power to turn the speaker off. It was an astonishing thing. Then the man moved with surprising quickness to the corner where the bed was. He sat on a chair beside Jonas, who was motionless, waiting for what would happen next. Close your eyes, relax, this will not be painful. Jonas remembered that he was allowed, that he had even been encouraged to ask questions. What are you going to do, sir? He asked, hoping that his voice didn't betray his nervousness. I am going to transmit the memory of snow, the old man said, and placed his hands on Jonas's bare back. Chapter 11. Jonas felt nothing unusual at first. He felt only the light touch of the old man's hands on his back. He tried to relax, to breathe evenly. The room was absolutely silent, and for a moment, Jonas feared that he might disgrace himself now on the first day of his training by falling asleep. Then he shivered. He realized that the touch of the hands felt suddenly cold. At the same instant, breathing in, he felt the air change, and his very breath was cold. He licked his lips, and in doing so, his tongue touched the suddenly chilled air. It was very startling, but he was not at all frightened. Now, he was filled with energy, and he breathed again, feeling the sharp intake of frigid air. Now, too, he could feel cold air swirling around his entire body. He felt it blow against his hands where they lay at his sides and over his back. The touch of the man's hands seemed to have disappeared. Now he became aware of an entirely new sensation. Pinpricks? No, because they were soft and without pain. Tiny, cold, feather-like feelings peppered his body and face. He put out his tongue again and caught one of the dots of cold upon it. It disappeared from his awareness instantly, but he caught another and another. The sensation made him smile. One part of his consciousness knew that he was still lying there on the bed in the annex room. Yet another, separate part of his being was upright now, in a sitting position, and beneath him, he could feel that he was not on the soft, decorated bed covering at all, but rather seated on a flat, hard surface. His hands now held, though at the same time they were still motionless at his sides, a rough, damp rope. And he could see, though his eyes were closed. He could see a bright, whirling torrent of crystals in the air around him, and he could see them gather on the backs of his hand like cold fur. His breath was visible. Beyond, through the swirl of what he now somehow perceived was the thing the old man had spoken of, snow, he could look out and down a great distance. He was up high someplace. The ground was thick with the furry snow, but he sat slightly above it, on a hard, flat object. Sled, he knew abruptly. He was sitting on a thing called sled, and the sled itself seemed to be poised at the top of a long, extended mound that rose from the very land where he was. Even as he thought the word mound, his new consciousness told him hill. Then the sled, with Jonas himself upon it, began to move through the snowfall, and he understood instantly that now he was going downhill. No voice made an explanation. The experience explained itself to him. His face cut through the frigid air as he began the descent, moving through the substance called snow on the vehicle called sled, which propelled itself on what he now knew without doubt to be runners. Comprehending all of those things as he sped downward, he was free to enjoy the breathless glee that overwhelmed him, the speed, the clear, cold air, the total silence, the feeling of balance and excitement and peace. Then, as the angle of incline lessened, as the mound, the hill, flattened, nearing the bottom, the sled's forward motion slowed. The snow was piled now around it, and he pushed with his body, moving it forward, not wanting the exhilarating ride to end. Finally, the obstruction of the piled snow was too much for the thin runners of the sled, and he came to a stop. He sat there for a moment, panting, holding the rope in his cold hands. Tentatively, he opened his eyes. Not his snow hill sled eyes, for they had been open throughout the strange ride. He opened his ordinary eyes and saw that he was still on the bed, that he had not moved at all. The old man, still beside the bed, was watching him. "How do you feel?" he asked. Jonas sat up and tried to answer honestly. "Surprised," he said, after a moment. The old man wiped his forehead with his sleeve. "Whew," he said. "It was exhausting. But even transmitting that tiny memory to you, I think it lightened me just a little." "Do you mean, you did say I could ask questions?" The man nodded, encouraging his question. "Do you mean that now you don't have the memory of it, of that ride on the sled anymore?" "That's right. A little weight off this old body." "But it was such fun, and now you don't have it anymore. I took it from you." But the old man laughed. "All I gave you was one ride on one sled, in one snow on one hill. I have a whole world of them in my memory. I could give them to you one by one 1,000 times, and there would still be more." Are you saying that we could do it again?" Jonas asked. "I'd really like to. I think I could steer by pulling the rope. I didn't try this time because it was so new." The old man, laughing, shook his head. "Maybe another day, for a treat. But there's no time really just to play. I only wanted to begin by showing you how it works. Now," he said, turning businesslike, "lie back down. I want to—" Jonas did. He was eager for whatever experience would come next. But he had suddenly so many questions. "Why don't we have snow and sleds and hills?" he asked. "And when did we— in the past, did my parents have sleds when they were young? Did you?" The old man shrugged and gave a short laugh. "No," he told Jonas. "It's a very distant memory. That's why it was so exhausting. I had to tug it forward from many generations back. It was given to me when I was a new receiver, and the previous receiver had to pull it through a long time period too." "But what happened to those things? Snow and the rest of it?" "Climate control. Snow made growing food difficult, limited the agricultural periods, and unpredictable weather made transportation almost impossible at times. It wasn't a practical thing, so it became obsolete when we went to sameness." And hills too, he added. "They make conveyance of goods unwieldy. Trucks, buses slowed them down. So," he waved his hand as if a gesture had caused hills to disappear. "Sameness," he concluded. Jonas frowned. "I wish we had those things still, just now and then." The old man smiled. "So do I," he said. "But that choice is not ours." "But, sir," Jonas suggested, "since you have so much power—" The man corrected him. "Honor," he said firmly. "I have great honor. So will you. but you will find that that is not the same as power. Lie quietly now, since we've entered into the topic of climate. Let me give you something else. And this time I'm not going to tell you the name of it because I want to test the receiving. You should be able to perceive the name without being told. I gave away snow and sled and downhill and runners by telling them to you in advance. Without being instructed, Jonas closed his eyes again. He felt the hands on his back again. He waited. Now it came more quickly, the feelings. This time the hands didn't become cold, but instead began to feel warm on his body. They moistened a little. The warmth spread, extending across his shoulders, up his neck, onto the side of his face. He could feel it through his clothed parts, too, a pleasant, all-over sensation. And when he licked his lips this time, the air was hot and heavy. He didn't move. There was no sled. His posture didn't change. He was simply alone, someplace out of doors, lying down, and the warmth came from far above. It was not as exciting as the ride through the snowy air, but it was pleasurable and comforting. Suddenly, he perceived the word for it, sunshine. He perceived that it came from the sky. Then it ended. Sunshine, he said aloud, opening his eyes. Good, you did get the word. That makes my job easier, not so much explaining. And it came from the sky. That's right, the old man said, just the way it used to. Before sameness, before climate control, Jonas added. The man laughed. You received well and learned quickly. I'm very pleased with you. That's enough for today, I think. We're off to a good start. There was a question bothering Jonas. Sir, he said, the chief elder told me, she told everyone, and you told me too, that it would be painful. So I was a little scared, but it didn't hurt at all. I really enjoyed it. He looked quizzically at the old man. The man sighed. I started you with memories of pleasure. My previous failure gave me the wisdom to do that. He took a few deep breaths. Jonas, he said, it will be painful, but it need not be painful yet. I'm brave, I really am. Jonas sat up a little straighter. The old man looked at him for a moment. He smiled. I can see that, he said. Well, since you asked the question, I think I have enough energy for one more transmission. Lie down once more. This will be the last today. Jonas obeyed cheerfully. He closed his eyes, waiting, and felt the hands again. Then he felt the warmth again, the sunshine again, coming from the sky of this other consciousness that was so new to him. This time, as he lay basking in the wonderful warmth, he felt the passage of time. His real self was aware that it was only a minute or two, but his other memory-receiving self felt hours pass in the sun. His skin began to sting. Restlessly, he moved one arm, bending it, and felt a sharp pain in the crease of his inner arm at the elbow. Ouch, he said loudly, and shifted on the bed. Ow, he said, wincing at the shift, and even moving his mouth to speak made his face hurt. He knew there was a word, but the pain kept him from grasping it. Then it ended. He opened his eyes, wincing with discomfort. It hurt, he told the man, and I couldn't get the word for it. It was sunburn, the old man told him. It hurts a lot, Jonas said, but I'm glad you gave it to me. It was interesting, and now I understand better what it meant, that there would be pain. The man didn't respond. He sat silently for a second. Finally, he said, Get up now. It's time for you to go home. They both walked to the center of the room. Jonas put his tunic back on. Goodbye, sir, he said. Thank you for my first day. The old man nodded to him. He looked drained and a little sad. Sir, Jonas said shyly. Yes, do you have a question? It's just that I don't know your name. I thought you were the receiver, but you say that now I'm the receiver, so I don't know what to call you. The man had sat back down in the comfortable upholstered chair. He moved his shoulders around as if to ease away an aching sensation. He seemed terribly weary. Call me the giver, he told Jonas. All right, we're going to stop there for today. I'm hoping you guys didn't misunderstand that I was just going up to get juice and coming back. I saw Kay on, I don't know if she's on Facebook or if she's on uh, YouTube. I saw Kay say a cliffhanger as though I wasn't coming back, but I just needed to get some quick fuel in me before I fell over and scared you all to death. Crazy how quick that happens. Um, all right, let me make sure I don't have any missing chats that I've not read. We've got 16 watching. We usually do pretty good in the replay. I think a lot of people are at work. Um, we're getting, I don't know, 600. It depends. I think we had about 1,500 with our previous book, Jonathan Cahn's, what is it called? The Return of the Gods. But I think this is just as good of a read, and I think we're really going to enjoy it. It's starting to get good. And I just love Lois Lowry's writing style. It's very fluid. Um, she's a master at character development. I really feel like Jonas is real to me, and The Giver is very interesting to read about. And I wish this were the first time I'd read it, so that experience was new, but that's okay. Um, and I feel like I have a good sense of his parents. That they just seem very solemn. What's interesting, and I don't know if you guys noticed this, but his parents strike me as almost like business partners. Don't you think? I That one got me. I We don't see any affection between them. We see respect, and um, they have a relationship that's friendly, but they don't strike me as having the intimacy of husband and wife. And so, if you'll recall back last week, Jonas first experienced the stirring. So he had been to the elder care center and he had helped with the baths, which um, the volunteers do, the volunteer children. And he had this dream that night. So Fiona is this little girl that it strikes me that he's got feelings for. They're at least very close friends. And he had this dream of standing next to the bathtub with Fiona and wanting Fiona to get undressed and get into the bathtub. And it gave him this that feeling in your gut. And he didn't know what it was. And so when it came time to share dreams at breakfast, he mentioned it. And so his mother sent his father and Lily off to go about their day. And she talked to Jonas and she said, those are called the stirrings. Everyone has them. They start at an age, and we figured you were getting to be about that age, and you just need to take this pill, and it'll stop that. And I thought, wow, can you even, just, I think a lot of us said in that moment when I was reading that it seems like puberty blockers. Um, it squashed that. There's something about being alive. There's something about having deep, visceral feelings that is so unique to the human experience. And I remember that. I remember being a girl and, having a crush on somebody when I was in the 5th grade, and all the weird butterfly tingly feelings it gave me. And it was such a new thing. And I remember not knowing to do with it, thinking, what is wrong with me? And there were 2 little boys in our class, and one was named Trent Kirkland, and he was very handsome. I think he's a pastor now. And the other's name was Danny Musso. And Danny lived next door to my best friend, Lisa Zarowski. And everybody had the hugest crush on Danny Musso. He was this Italian, I guess, looking guy, had dark hair, had the starts of a mustache in 5th grade, which you didn't see then. You see it more now, I think. And he lived right next door to Lisa. And so I would stay yeah, I think the pills take care of that. I would stay the night with Lisa, and we could see into his bedroom. And so we were so weird, but we were just little kids. We were curious. And so one night we were in her room playing, and we caught the light come on in his room, and he was in his room and he took off his shirt, and we were like, oh my gosh, he's just the cutest boy ever. I know he doesn't even know I'm alive, but it'd be so cool if one day I could be his girlfriend. And I told Lisa, I said, you live right next door to him. You could become his girlfriend. And she was the smartest girl in our class, very studious, kind of, nerdy, cute. And she just didn't perceive herself that way. And it was funny because they were friends. They lived close, next door to each other. They didn't really hang out in school, but by virtue of being neighbors, I think he had older brothers too. Um, but I just remember that as my first weird, tingly feeling about boys, and it it just filled my brain. I remember going home and like closing my eyes and trying to recreate it and thinking, "Gosh, that was such an exciting feeling." And and it just when I read that part of the book, I was reminded of just the thoughts that I had about it the first time I read it. The first time I read it, there was nobody was getting puberty blockers, and I thought this a really odd thing. And here I am rereading it so many years later. Like I said, it was written in 1993. I read it quite a bit after that. Um, but now looking back at it with eyes from today and from the world that we live in, I can see that as a possibility. Things would be better um, if we were able to stifle those feelings and we could avoid all these problems. I could just see the world, right now we're in this age of free sex, no consequences. If there is a consequence, you can easily do away with that. And I could see, maybe 10, 20 years down the road, us going to a model where we don't have to worry about unplanned pregnancies or whatever. It's an interesting thing to think about. It's funny because I was in a chat. I think it was Red Pill 78. Zach's a friend of mine. I've been on his show, and um, I was in his chat the other day, and somehow in the chat, Zach wasn't talking about it, but somehow in the chat, the flat Earth debate came up, and I'd never heard it until, I mean, probably this month, and so people were talking about it, and I was just kind of watching the conversation, and people were getting very irate with each other. Um, that there would be one person that just couldn't believe the stupidity of the people who believed it, and then the people who believed it couldn't believe the naivete of the people who didn't believe it. And I watched for a little bit, and then I chimed in, and I said, some things are just really interesting to debate and to talk about, and I think we've lost sight of that. People are so hard lined in their ideas and what they believe and their religion, basically, and I'm not talking about church, um, that they can't hear anything else. They can't have wonder about any other ideas, even if it's a false idea. It's a it's a wild thing to think about, and people are even shutting that down. They're shutting down fantasy and imagination and what ifs, and maybe this world is bigger than we know, and maybe there's a lot going on that we don't understand. And I'm not, hi Holden McGroin, I'm not coming down on either side of that debate. I'm just saying I love the conversation. We had the 9/11 fella on a couple weeks ago, and I mean, I had somebody leave the channel over that couldn't believe that we were having that conversation, and I thought, wow, when did simple conversation become so offensive that people could not be a part of it? This wasn't an argument. It wasn't obscene. It was just one person's take on the science of how things were explained to us that they went down that day. And I don't know if he's right or not. I don't know if it was exactly the way the government says. I doubt it, because the government, it's in their interest to lie to us about many things. But I don't accept, his answer is the sole answer, because there's holes in it. But I had the conversation. He has a right to speak his mind from his experience and his education. And I think as humans, we should be willing to listen to that. You don't have to agree. You can listen for a while and say, yeah, this is just too much for me, and you go on. But it was interesting to me that someone actually unsubscribed over it, because I think most of my content is, I try to be apolitical. I do point out the ridiculous political stuff that's going on, but it's on both sides of the aisle. I have equal distaste for both political parties, depending on the person. Uh, and I can see that there's there's plenty of fault to go around. So I feel like I've been pretty middle of the road on most things. Now I have been hard about um, public health policies because it broke me to see what was going on during COVID. In my nursing career, I had never seen such things done to people, such, revenge exacted on people for not, being willing to go do something that the government said you should do without giving you very much information. We always respected that. When H1N1 hit, there was a vaccine for that. And I remember I was working at the hospital and the doctor said, did you give him his H1N1 vaccine? And I said, no, he didn't want it. He's like, well, you need to get him to take that. And I looked at him and I said, have you taken it? He's like, oh, no, I'm not going to take it. But the reason he wanted him to take it is because they get money when he does take it. And he told me that. The hospital makes money when they take it, and I think a certain percentage might go to the physician. I don't know. He didn't explain it, but the hospital definitely got money. And I just looked at him and I said, I'm not going to tell him to take something that I'm not willing to take and that you're not willing to take. If that's what you want, that's a conversation you should have with him. And but we respected that. It didn't go anywhere after that. The patient had said that he didn't want it. I had explained to him some of what happened with the swine flu vaccine in the 70s, and this was the same virus or some variation thereof, and that there had been, Guillain-Barré syndrome, and that I had gotten that shot. My mom had gotten it, and for weeks I couldn't walk. I had to be carried to the bathroom, and I was a little girl, 5 maybe, and my mom was down for months. Debbie, try refreshing because it's still going on my end. So I just think all of us, Democrats, Republicans, Black people, white people, gay, trans, straight, whatever you are, I think we need to work on trying not to define us so much, not to be so tribal, I guess is what I'm looking for. Hold on, I'm sending a message in Rumble. Ultimately, we are all human beings. We share a planet. We were created by the divine. Some people are doing horrible things, which will always be the case. It's unfortunate, but it's true. Some people will do crazy things. It's unfortunate, but again, also true. The only thing that we can control is ourselves. And if the people who are not behaving terribly or crazy don't set an example of how we used to live, then I worry that'll be lost. There used to be a time where you could hold strong political opinions that differed from somebody, friends and family and people that you knew. And that wasn't something that ever divided us. We just, in polite conversation, you didn't discuss those things because they could be triggers for, bickering or whatever. So, my grandmother even taught me things you don't discuss in mixed company, or things that you don't discuss in a group, politics, religion, and sex. And that was just known. You didn't see it. People didn't talk about those things unless they were with people they knew were like-minded, or because they didn't want to stir contention. And I think we need to get back to not holding so tightly to these titles, being conservative, being liberal, being progressive, being a person of color, being trans, being queer, being straight. And we have to all remember to be people. And we have to remember that everyone else is a person. And we need to be careful how we talk about people. And yes, there's craziness going on, and it makes me nuts. And I do occasionally have to vent about it because it scares me. I'm worried about the path that we're walking down. And I'm worried that if we don't speak up, that we may be running down that path. And it sure seems we are. But the way to do that is not to be more political and more divisive. The way to do that is to be gracious. And people will still reject it. That's just know that. It's kind of like, my son was just so upset about all of this stuff falling on his head all at once and having this huge financial issue that we have no way to solve right now. Um, and I said, you know what? Um, it's been true for me that what makes my life a lot easier and a lot less traumatic is knowing that trouble is going to come. Life is messy. It just is. And you have to expect it. And you have to understand that sometimes it's super messy, but you always kind of recover to this baseline. And how we react in those moments is a big part of how we get through them. And so I think it's, you know, there's a place, for your people like Salty Cracker, who is just basically venting everyone's frustration and rage over the loss of innocence and the loss of just things making sense and and normalcy. Because if you don't get it out, if you don't have some way to decompress that, it can be really problematic for you and cause all kinds of physical and emotional problems. um, but that's not the way to go at life. You can't go at life in salty cracker mode, um, because you're not going to be able to sway anyone with that kind of contention. Now, to be fair, that's not what he's trying to do. He's trying to bring light to things that are dangerous and ridiculous through mocking them. And that is a tactic. That's a Saul Alinsky um, tactic to discredit something. And I do believe that many of these things need to be discredited. Um, but that's not how you go and interact in real life with other people. And I think we need to be mindful of that. And we need to not just automatically shut ourselves off to people based on what t-shirt they're wearing or what their bumper sticker is or what they look like. Because invariably, Christ gave us such a good example of how to win hearts, and that's through love. And so you can be loving to someone and be kind without endorsing their lifestyle, and that's totally fine, and that's appropriate. And so I just want us to kind of remember that as things feel like they're going over the cliff, that the one thing we can control is ourselves. And we can decide that we're not going to become ugly. And I think that's really important. I think that's, part of what my appeal is to people, is that yes, I'll vent frustration and just be totally overwhelmed with ridiculous stuff from time to time. And we'll all kind of pile on in that. But that is a release. That's a relief to let that go, so that I don't go out and have that filter over my eyes and see everything that way every time I go out the door. So that would be my just kind of my sentiment for the day. Don't let this um, don't let this make you ugly. Don't become like the people that turn your stomach, because kindness and graciousness and gentleness are appealing. And ultimately you get enough trouble uh, in life without totally turning your attitude topsy-turvy. Is anybody else having trouble with the screen freezing up? Debbie Bender's gone over to YouTube to see if it's any better there, but she says she's having trouble there too. Patty says it used to be live and let live. Oh, I'm sorry, live and let live, till some decided others needed to be excluded from society. I agree, but that doesn't. We can't let that form our attitude, our front-facing public attitude. Yes, it's not live and let live anymore, but it can still be live and let live with you. The society, and I think most of society is live and let live. The media just shoves down your throat 24/7 the people who are trying to force change. And so it might be helpful just to turn that off. That's why I watch a lot of news on Rumble, because it's middle of the road. It's, letting you decide, just giving you the information. And if you're starting to feel that become oppressive to you, the whole mainstream news and the constant attacks, I would remind you don't have to watch it, because it's bad for you. It just is. Holden says, I have a favor to ask you. What's the favor? Oh, please put in the. I'm sorry, catching up on a few comments there. YouTube is okay. I don't know what it is. Everything I'm watching, I've got the Rumble feed up on the left of my screen, and so I'm watching it, and I've not had any freezing at all. So I don't know. Maybe I have no brain for tech, so there's no way I could figure it out. Actually, um, if Wolf were here, Wolf could tell us. Maybe he'll watch later or listen later while he's at work and type a comment and let us know what it was. Holden, what's your favor, bud? And I'm going to move this up. While Holden's typing, uh, just a reminder, go to the description section of this video. I will get it up in YouTube if it's not up right now. There's a Give, Send, Go campaign. No? Holden McGroin says, I have a huge favor to ask of you. Then he says no. Okay. What's no? If you go to the description section, there's a link for the Give, Send, Go campaign for my son Jacob. I talked about this at the beginning. If you got here late, he and his fiance are engaged to be married. That got put off because of COVID. They've had to put it off again because the economy has gotten so bad that their housing is way above what they can afford, and their lease is up in August, and they can't find a place to live that they can afford. They're not having freezing on Rumble. And a week and a half ago, I guess, he was driving home with no place to pull over, and his like 55 miles an hour, and his axle snapped. And luckily they weren't hurt. They were stuck on the road with hazard lights on the interstate with people, flying around them. And we were just scared to death they were going to be hurt, but they're okay. But they took the car to the dealership, had it towed to the dealership, and it was going to be $6,600, which none of us have that just sitting around. And he's still paying on the car, of course. And so Don knows of a shop here in Winchester that's good, and the guy's honest, and he quoted us $3,600, and then with the tow and everything, and to get actually it's a little bit more than $4,000, but to get the car released from the dealership that it's at, so we can bring it here and fix it, it's going to cost about $4,000. And so we're covering the towing and everything. I think that still puts us at $4,000 though. We've been able to raise about $600 on Give, Send, Go. So if you guys in any way can donate or help with that, it would mean the world to me and to Jacob and Jessica. Any money that's donated to the show until that amount has been reached will go to Jake and Jess, unless you specify otherwise. There's all the ways that you can donate are in the description section, and you can donate however you want. You don't have to go through Give, Send, Go if you don't want to. You can go through PayPal or Venmo or Cash App, and I will make sure that money gets to Jacob, or to the dealership, or to the auto shop, actually. Holden says, could you do a show on a group called the Finders and the CIA involvement? It was a scandal in 1987. Rambo has been doing a lot. I have never heard of that. On a group called the Finders. Holden, I'm going to pop it's in the description. No, the cat wasn't breathing. What? I'm so confused. So I'm going to put in the description my email, or in the comment section. It'll be gone once the video's over. But the chat wasn't freezing. Okay, so not the cat wasn't breathing. Hold on, I'm going to type in my email address here. Health coach. I never can remember which one it is. Hold on. Isn't that funny? Someday I'll get it. It is. Yeah, it is just coach. Witthealthcoach at gmail.com. Spelled that wrong. There you go. Just send me some links and I'll look into that, and I'll get back with you on it. I'm open to any show suggestions. If there's stuff you guys want to talk about, let me know, because it's my show as much as it is yours. On Friday, we're going to talk about the malaria thing. and possible over-the-counter treatments for that, and maybe to help prevent it if you live in Florida or Texas. We're going to talk about the Gates mosquitoes. Um, there's a bunch of stuff. I've got just a huge list since we didn't do a show last week. So definitely tune in on Friday, 8:30 Eastern. I know Salty's on at that time, but we usually go till 12 or 12:30. So you can come on over after if you're watching his show. And then if you guys have an opinion on moving the Friday show to Saturday or Sunday afternoons, let me know. Um, because there's just not a lot to watch on Rumble on Saturday and Sunday afternoons. And that might be a good spot for us to pick up a bunch of viewers, but I don't want to move it if that's something that would be a hardship for you guys, because I really like having you in the chat. All right, I'm going to pray us out, and I will see you guys again on Friday. We are keeping the book club to Wednesdays because Tuesday kept running into issues, and I'm like, let's not move it back and forth. Let's just stay with Wednesdays. So let me pray us out. Heavenly Father, thank you for this day and for our friends and for our family. And I just pray for anybody here whose heart and spirit is struggling with all of the things that are going on and all of the meanness that's out there. The meanness is really hard, and the exclusion is so difficult. As humans, we want fellowship, and to be excluded for our ideas, and sometimes excluded publicly, is just so difficult. And I would just pray your comfort on anybody who's struggling with that, because I've been there and it's not easy. Father, I pray that you would soften the hearts of families and friends and the rest of the people in the world to not be so militant about their ideas, and to allow room for other people to have ideas, and not force whatever their agendas are on other people. And of course, that's always going to be a problem, but I would pray that you would give us wisdom and remind us that not all things are permitted, but not all things are good for us. And that sometimes you just have to walk away from those situations. Father, help us be salt and light to the world. We know that that's what Jesus was. We know that's your will for our lives, and that we win people's hearts through love and through understanding and compassion and empathy. And help us know that it's okay to not approve of a particular behavior or activity, but that we still need to have compassion and empathy and love. And even if those are people that it's not good for us to be around, so we've had to separate ourselves, please help us to pray for those people with compassion, empathy, and love, as Jesus would have. And we know that your word does not return void, and wherever two or more of us are gathered together in your name, when we ask for things, that you will provide those. Father, I want to thank you for the people that have gotten us up to $600 on the Give, Send, Go campaign. I know that you know what the financial need is, and that you're going to move in a huge way, and that is going to be to your glory, and will be assigned to Jacob and Jessica of your hand in their lives. And we just thank you for that, for your provision and your love through your people. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, guys. Chazzy I've never seen you before, but welcome. Rumble.com. Alligator waiting for a victim during a flood. Yeah, that sounds terrifying. I was so afraid when we went to Cocoa Beach. I did a near-death experience talk there a while back. And I would not go in the water. I'm like, okay, there's these sharks. And we did that shark story where I covered how the scientists were watching these sharks go into the shallow end, and how they were studying to see if they would attack humans or not shouting out a warning or anything. I'm like, no, I'm out. I'm not going in that water. And we were right there on the Indian River, and that's a bullhead shark nursery. It's not something anybody's running. It's just where bullhead sharks grow up. And no, there was just no way. But yeah, I'll have a look at the alligator waiting for a victim. Maybe I'll throw that into Friday night's show. Thank you guys for being patient with the low blood sugar response in the middle of the show, and letting me run upstairs and get some cheese and orange juice and check my sugar to make sure I wasn't going to do something embarrassing like pass out during the show. That would have been awful. I will see you guys on Friday and then again on Wednesday. And until then, take care of yourselves. I love you, whole big bunches. Nurse Penny out.